Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today's class is all about hydrangeas. And of course, I am surrounded as usual with the best of the hydrangea collection here at the moment, which changes all the time. You know, our inventory changes at each of our locations. But today I was able to just make a quick roundup of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, about a dozen different cultivars and types of hydrangeas. And so get ready to learn about all that there is to offer in the world of hydrangeas. If they are already your favorite, you're going to be really excited to find some new ones to come add to your garden. And if you don't know anything about hydrangeas, this is a great opportunity to fall in love with them. Here we are in the second week of June. We are right in the beginning of hydrangea blooming season. So typically hydrangeas in the Pacific Northwest start flowering right about this time of year, and often will flower now from June well into August, September, and sometimes even on through October, depending on how quickly the season wraps up. And so as far as bloom time goes, they offer one of the longest bloom seasons of really any of our shrubs that we have choices to plant in our gardens. I mean, they bloom almost like an annual can bloom. The only other, I'd say, counterpart in the garden would be roses, which often bloom about the same period, so June through September, October, depending on the season. But hydrangeas prefer a different environment than roses do. So you can really have it all if you have everything in your garden, because hydrangeas want a filtered light or a morning sun basically in the afternoon shade, or dappled shade all day long. Hydrangeas can grow into deeper shade, but will often, like a lot of flowers going into deeper shade, often they'll bloom less and have just less flower color the deeper the shade goes for a hydrangea. On the other side of things, they are not super heat tolerant. So although a hydrangea can grow in pretty good sunlight, I wouldn't put them in a space where they're going to receive reflective heat or reflective sun from a fence nearby, the deck, windows from your house, or even the side of your house if they're real close to it, and getting like a bounce back afternoon sun that's reflecting that heat. That could be a real hot situation for a hydrangea and literally end up as a hot mess. So one I guess thing to consider is that your probably best sides of the garden or best exposures for hydrangeas in your garden is, like I said, morning sun, and that's going to put them usually on the east side of the house. They'll also do fairly well on north side exposures, as long as they are getting a little bit of sunlight through the growing months. Not the best exposure for a hydrangea would be like west side up against the house, or in a real hot spot like that. So if you don't have some trees that are buffering that late afternoon sun, I would reconsider planting a hydrangea there for all of their needs for kind of protection from that heat. So really, there are cultivars, and we're going to talk about different species of hydrangeas and then cultivars within those species. And breeders have just been going crazy with hydrangeas over the last several years, which means plant breeders are developing new traits and new characteristics to introduce into hydrangeas, or to highlight in hydrangeas for various uses. And that includes hydrangeas that are out there with some heat tolerance, and I've got one that we'll talk about on that, and also hydrangeas that are just better suited for more sun exposure, and even in some cases some of that later afternoon sun they can tolerate. So 2020, although it's been named a lot of different things this year, 2020, we began this year with one of the horticulture industry trade groups dubbing it the year of the hydrangea. So I know that again, a lot of things have been eclipsed by recent chaotic current events, but the year of the hydrangea is still somewhere in the background as one of those things that was intended to be represented by 2020. And part of the reason of that is because there has become such a wealth of selection and diversity within the hydrangea world. So we started out, of course, already with several different species of hydrangeas, because hydrangea is the genus that all of these plants kind of share. So one big umbrella family or genus that they all belong in, and then within that umbrella, there are different species of hydrangeas. And just for fun, just for fun, I grabbed a few leaves of the various species of hydrangeas just to give us a sense of their different shapes and colors. I just want to be shorter. Not necessarily colors, I guess. Shapes and textures more than anything. So we have two very rounded leaves of the climbing hydrangeas. And these are these two here, which we'll again discuss. Yes, there are climbing hydrangeas. And then we have two very distinct looking leaves of oak leaf hydrangeas. So if you're familiar with the pattern of an oak's leaf, you may be able to kind of see that pattern in this hydrangea. Oak leaf hydrangeas, some with also beautiful colored stems, so kind of a reddish orangish stem. And then the last two hydrangea leaves that I have on my against my packet here, this is a hydrangea paniculata, or a panicle style hydrangea. And then this one here is hydrangea macrophylla, also known as the big leaf hydrangea. So starting with the big leaf hydrangea, which this leaf is not as big as they can get, but the standard big leaf hydrangeas can even get a leaf twice the size of this one here at least. But that is the hydrangea that most of us are familiar with. So hydrangea macrophylla, big leaf hydrangea. This is most likely the one that we associate with maybe grandma's house. I know I do. The great big hydrangea that grew up against the house that by summer, was flopped over on the walkway, and we all had to make a path on the grass to go around it because no one wanted to cut all of its beautiful flowers off to just regain, walkway space. That was most likely one of the oldest, old-fashioned varieties of macrophylla hydrangea, known as Nikko Blue. And the macrophylla hydrangea family, or species, represents a wide range of flower shapes and sizes on a plant that, before the breeders really started working on it, was typically like 4 to 6 feet tall and wide, and a pretty fast growing plant. So, you planted it and it just sort of exploded in your home or in your garden, and often was planted in an area that maybe you didn't anticipate it getting quite so large. So like I mentioned at Grandma's, we all had to walk around this great big plant because, well, no one really thought it would always grow every year back to that mammoth proportion. I'm not sure why we never learned, but a beautiful plant is still worth appreciating where it is. So the flower form on the standard macrophyllas is either what's called a mop head. So a mop head flower is just a big rounded dome of blooms, and it's actually made up of multiple individual flowers that kind of comprise one big flower. So we have slightly individual flowers, but really when you look at it, you're just looking at one big dome or mop head. And the mop head style is contrasted with a style that I don't quite have a blooming version of, but I show you a picture, and this picture represents a lace cap style bloom. So lace caps, rather than being a dense dome of flowers, the lace cap flowers kind of hover on the outside of a little bit more of a tight centered flower. So they're just a bit airier and more delicate looking than the mop heads. So those are your two flower styles, typically mop head, lace cap. And then hydrangeas in this macrophylla category typically come in a few color shades. We see them either represented in pinks or in blues. And then there's also a white flowering form of the macrophyllas. Now, the white hydrangeas typically will bloom white and stay white, but the pink and blue colors, we as gardeners actually can influence either the intensity of the color, or we can change a blue hydrangea to pink or a pink hydrangea to blue over a season or two by adding some amendments to the soil that will adjust or change the pH of the soil. So we've talked about this in previous classes. Soil chemistry, as many of you know, is a fascinating topic, but even just on the surface, soil chemistry can be tested. We can easily do a home test to determine the basic pH of our garden soil. Dennis MDs carries a range of these tests that you can do. They're like 8th grade science level, or if you have a pool or a spa at home, you probably do these kind of tests all the time. A one test, this is just a simple single test at a time. That's like a $2 check on your pH. But I always recommend getting either a pack of multiple tests, because you'll test your pH, then you'll add some amendments, and then you'll want to test your pH further down the line to see the changes that are being made by the amendments that you've added. So it's good to check and recheck your pH after a couple of months. And then we also have like the full package. So this is a soil test that includes the 3 basic or primary nutrients that plants utilize, so nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And then it also has a pH test to just fully get a profile of your soil. But once you do a pH test, or if you don't do a pH test, you can assume if you're in the Pacific Northwest in unamended native soil, our soil tends to be slightly acidic. So that means that even if you take a pink blooming hydrangea home this year, after growing in your acidic soil for a season or so, the pink hydrangea is going to begin turning blue as a response to the acidic soil that we have. So now we can keep it pink if that was our intention, or we can speed up the natural process of turning blue, or even intensify the blue color by just adding some amendments in the soil. And those 2 amendments, as I get into all these specifics, again, the handout that goes along with the class will be posted as a blog attachment to this class. The 2 different amendments that you use is lime, which is again calcium carbonate, so lime, or a wonderfully labeled and named product called Hydrangea Bluing Formula. And Hydrangea Bluing Formula is basically sulfur, which comes from aluminum sulfate. So they are both pellet style, so you would put this either into a broadcast spreader or a spreader, or even just measure it out and spread by hand. You can see on the lime package there is a pink hydrangea, reminding you that it turns hydrangeas pink. And then here again on this product, a nice blue hydrangea and that lovely label of Hydrangea Bluing Formula to remind yourself of what it's used for. So there are application instructions always on the package, but soil pH is a geological factor. I don't know if I'm using the right words, but it's representative of geological forces and natural forces, which means that there's no magic wand to wave over the soil to say, abracadabra, you are now at pH 4.5 or 7.5. So it's a process that we need to work with to create that change and allow some time for nature to actually take up those changes and show the effect. And in any single season of application of these products, you're really only able to move your pH in your soil about 1 point in either direction. So if you're studying the pH test kits and you come up with a pH reading of 6.5 today in your garden, you will be able to get it to either 5.5 or 7.5 probably by this time next year, but I wouldn't expect that you could pull it much further down without a longer attempt at repeated applications. So I hope that makes sense, but again, ask any questions you want in the comments and I'll do my best to answer those either during or after the class. So other than soil pH and how we can affect colors on those macrophylas, the interesting developments that have been taking place over the last couple of years with the macrophylla breeds are, well, cultivars I'll say, is making them more compact, and a phenomenon that has a fancy botanical term called remontanence. And remontanence is the ability for a hydrangea to produce flower buds on current year's growth or on new wood, in addition to being able to produce flower buds on previous year's growth or old wood. And old hydrangeas, like our grandma's hydrangeas, were only capable of forming flower buds on previous year's wood or on old wood. So when pruning was done on those old-fashioned hydrangeas, depending on the timing and the severity of the pruning, often we would see either a season that blooming was completely lost because the pruning took off all of the future flower buds from that old wood, or we saw a significant delay or decrease in flowering because of that pruning job. And for that reason, I think hydrangea pruning became kind of one of those areas of sort of trepidation for gardeners, or at the very least, like full of mystique and a lot of questions. So the end of the handout for the class covers in pretty good depth full-on hydrangea pruning of all of the different cultivars and different species that we'll be talking about today. So if a lot of questions come up on pruning, again, check the handout and then make sure that we haven't answered the question for you already. It is it's easy to connect some of the basic needs of hydrangeas to the hydrangea itself, and probably other than that dappled sun light exposure that's pretty critical for most of them, what's most important for hydrangeas is that they stay hydrated. So if you just think of the hydra in hydrangea, that should help you to kind of think, oh yes, these are not drought tolerant plants. In fact, hydrangeas really do love average moist soil and a pretty consistent watering or a consistent amount of moisture. Now, it doesn't mean that they want to sit in a bog and they don't grow in a pond. So they do need well-draining soil, and they can be overwatered, and even in containers we can overwater hydrangeas if we don't let that soil dry out just a little bit in between waterings for the roots to get some air. But regular and consistent watering on hydrangea can not only keep the plant looking good, but can positively impact flower quantity and flower size. So the more you can water them, or at least provide adequate moisture for them, the more flowers they'll have and they will be bigger. So that's, again, kind of a good thing to remember. It's as we're planting a hydrangea, it's always a good idea, planting anything, especially going into hot weather months, is dig your hole and fill your hole full of water. And just make sure that, number one, the hole drains within, let's say certainly within the hour, but we'd love it to drain within 15-20 minutes. And if it doesn't drain, that gives you an opportunity to, before you put a plant in there, dig a wider hole, add a deeper, wider hole, add some amendments, some gravel, some pumice at the bottom, and incorporate some more amendments into the clay to break up that particle size as you're replanting, just to make sure that the plant that goes into a better environment than that heavy, wet hole that you're observing. So now, the newly planted hydrangea is going to benefit from a deep watering or a deep soaking going into summer months at least 2 to 3 times a week. So that means, again, either soak or hose, or drop the hose right at the base of the plant with the water just kind of trickling out, and leave it for a good 15 or 20 minutes to soak down deep into the ground and not puddle out all over the soil surface, and decrease that watering kind of as the plant becomes a little bit more established. So it's in containers, we'll likely have to water more often, but it's one of those things that it's best to water in the mornings to give your plants a start of the day well hydrated, instead of waiting until the end of the day when they've just been kind of cooked and baked all of their moisture out, and then we resupply them with the moisture that they've lost. Really better off to give them a well hydrated beginning, and then let them kind of lose naturally that moisture throughout the day. If a bit of later afternoon sun, or even direct sun, falls on some of these big leaf hydrangeas, especially the ones that like the shade the most, a little shadow of direct sun or light or whatever for an hour or so can often cause the plants to do what's called a midday wilt. And I often say, sometimes I want to do a midday wilt too. And that it's really a midday wilt is when the sun is directly on the plant, and it just sort of, it relaxes just a little bit. It looks as if it's wilting. If you're home and you see that happening, you want to run out and throw water on the plant. It's just our natural, instinct. But if you know that plant started its day well hydrated, then you can simply make sure that as the sun moves off of it, if that plant can perk back up after the sun is off of it, then it was just an adaptive strategy that the plant has done to lessen the surface area of its leaves. So when it wilts a little bit, its leaves just can't lose quite as much moisture from the sun. It's not cooking quite as much, and so it's able to withstand that hour and then snap back into attention and look better after the sun has passed. If we go out and water in response to a midday wilt, in spite of the fact that the plant has already been watered, we could be overwatering within a short amount of time, and then the plant will begin showing signs of distress. Now, if it's wilting in the beginning of the day, and you know that then you will know that it's needing water. So, the afternoon or midday wilt, like I said, you need to kind of add that all up in context of whether or not you know that it's been hydrated earlier on. So, the more sun, also the more water a hydrangea will need. So you can grow these guys in a little bit more sun, just then deeper watering and more regularly. And deep watering is not accomplished by lawn sprinklers, or sprinklers that go like this. Those or even this kind of sprinkler doesn't offer us deep watering. All of those style of sprinklers really end up watering, maybe 4 or 6 inches deep, and it's that's more practical for lawn areas or big areas that we're only looking to water shallowly. So either drip irrigation, soaker hoses, or hand watering with that long, slow water trickle is going to give you that deep watering that the plants really need to get established. Now, when we talk about winter hardiness or cold hardiness, there's a wide range of cold hardiness on hydrangeas. Now in the world of online videos, I have no idea where you are, where you're watching this. I'm making a lot of assumptions that you are, my neighbor, and here in Portland, Oregon. But if you're watching from somewhere else, your zone is going to, your USDA hardiness zone and your minimum winter temperatures are going to affect whether or not you can grow all of these various hydrangeas, or if you will need to stick to a few different species. In Minnesota, which is one of the coldest climates that I'm familiar with because my in-laws and sister-in-law live there, they are limited on the types of hydrangeas they can grow due to the cold winter temperatures. And so it's the Hydrangea arborensis, also known as the Annabelle hydrangea, that is really the one for the coldest climates and the coldest temperatures. And that Annabelle or arborensis hydrangea puts its flowers out on current year's growth. So if you think about the hydrangeas that bloom on previous year's wood, that means that flower buds exist on the plant through winter and then come fully mature in late spring or June to ripen, to flower. So if the winter is really extreme, those flower buds will freeze out and be vulnerable, and probably not bloom again. So that's why the cold hardiness is affected by the different species of hydrangeas. But to talk just a hair about, again, the wide world of hydrangeas, starting with one that probably a few people are very familiar with, and that's the climbing hydrangea. So I've got a couple of different varieties of climbing hydrangea here, but this is a lovely example of what a nice screen the hydrangea can make, because I can completely disappear behind it. Well, you might have seen my rear end there, but so climbing hydrangeas can get enormous. Climbing hydrangeas, if you're familiar with our Lake Oswego location, they cover the entire backside, which is the north-facing side of our warehouse, and provide the neighbors that live behind us with a nice greenery to cover the building instead of having to look at our building itself. The deep shade doesn't affect the greenery of the climbing hydrangea, but it really only blooms well when it gets some slightly filtered light or brighter light. It's on the tail end actually of its flower, but you can see a good example of what a lace, can you see that? Of what a lace cap flower looks like. So again, we have kind of bigger flowers that look like they sort of hover or dangle off of a tighter little bunch of flowers in the center. Kind of a ivory white, maybe even starting out more like a apple green, so kind of a cool color concept. This is a deciduous vine, so it will drop its leaves in the winter time and go to sticks, but the sticks, oh, it's hard to see the detail of the sticks, but the branches and sticks themselves, the bark sort of peels off of them as they age, and so they have a pretty kind of a peely bark attractiveness that gives them that winter interest that I think, is better than just non-peely boring sticks. So some of us aren't into sticks in the winter, I understand, but there's a great advantage to this particular vine as a screen in that it climbs like Spider-Man, like ivy, right? So it has sucker feet type attachments that allow it to scale a sheer wall, or a brick chimney, a stone facade, or a building face, or even wood. But what this as a climbing vine doesn't necessarily do is it doesn't twine around things, it climbs straight up their surface, if that makes sense. And the first year of a climbing hydrangea, it doesn't do a whole lot. So it does take it a good solid season to get established, but once it starts growing, then it can easily go, what does the tag says? The tag says 50 to 80 feet long. So yeah, I wasn't joking around. It covers the whole backside of our warehouse, which is a pretty good sized building. So 50 to 80 feet Now that means you could prune it and it doesn't grow that super fast. So give you definitely some great coverage once it gets itself established. The climbing hydrangea is also available in a couple of different leaf forms. So I was showing you the variegated, this is Miranda, and so it has just kind of a lighter green and a edge of sort of gold or yellow at the edge of the leaf. So Miranda gives us some nice variegation.
Nicole, does the climbing hydrangea damage brick?
Yeah, I mean it's no more than any other footed vine, but it's not so much the brick as it's the grout, I think, that it gets into. It's been on our building for a decade or more, and we're not overly concerned about structural integrity or anything like that. I mean, we're concerned, but we're not concerned about it damaging structural integrity. But I wouldn't put it up an absolutely beautiful wall that you're so proud of. Usually we're trying to hide something that's kind of scrappy in the first place. So hopefully that answers the question. And then the last climbing hydrangea to look at, so the first two I just showed both drop their leaves in the wintertime. And this is an evergreen climbing hydrangea. So this is actually Hydrangea integrifolia. And the evergreen climbing hydrangea has quite a different looking leaf. So longer, thinner, even a little bit kind of wavy with a serrated or toothed edge. And it is what I would consider a shy bloomer. So a shy bloomer is still able to flower. It just doesn't give you tons and tons of flowers all the time. It's not the biggest for showy for color. Best in partial sun. And again, we're looking at a smaller plant in general, so maybe 12, 15, possibly up to 20 feet tall, but evergreen, so it keeps its leaves in the wintertime as opposed to the deciduous varieties. Still has the little feet similar to ivy, so self-clinging once it gets itself established. So this is Hydrangea integrifolia, the evergreen climbing hydrangea. And I don't have any of the arborensis or the Annabelles to show today, but we will be posting pictures as well on the blog, so we'll add in some pictures of the different Annabelle styles. The big leaves that we were talking about, again, just to kind of go through some of the cool new varieties that are out there in the big leaves. The Hydrangea macrophyllus, as I mentioned, like the old-fashioned ones. Nikko Blue is probably one of the most well-known, large flower that's like powder blue or sky blue, great big leaf, and a great big plant, 4 to 6 feet tall and wide, and easily achieves that. You can cut it way back and it grows to that pretty much in a single season. So not only the size of that hydrangea, but the fact that it had only the ability to bloom on previous year's wood, or known as old wood, like I said, kind of caused a little bit of, well, I don't have room for that, or gosh, I'm afraid to prune that, just a little bit of lack of confidence for gardeners. So one of the first of this kind of next generation or new hybrids of hydrangeas came out, I'm going to say sometime in the mid to late 90s, I don't even remember when, but it was called Endless Summer Hydrangea. And the Endless Summer Hydrangea was a game changer in hydrangeas for a lot of different reasons. Endless Summer was one of the first hybrids or cultivars that had the ability to flower on not only old wood or previous year's wood, but could create flower buds on new wood or this year's wood, which enabled the plant to not only have a longer bloom cycle because it produced 2 different kind of times of buds, which would then lengthen the whole bloom time. So a shrub that already blooms a long time, it has lengthened the bloom time. That also made it easier for those of us that prune to have more confidence that we could still prune on the plant and not lose all of our flowers for the following season. And then at the same time with the Endless Summer hybrids, they were beginning to make the plant more compact. So breeders began kind of enabling the plant to just be a little bit smaller and a little bit smaller. And I think that was all kind of happening at the same time as a lot of our yards were also getting a little bit smaller or a lot bit smaller, which makes it pretty hard to fit a couple of plants that get 6 by 6 before you're really out of space for, you know, enjoying your yard or other plants. So the original, Endless Summer, the original, had that same powder blue mop head style flower as the Nikko Blue traditional or, you know, old-fashioned form. It is 3 to 5 feet tall and wide, and we can still affect that flower color. So from powder blue, you can take it to a pink. But it began this endless summer hydrangea breeding craze that has now been taken up by a lot of different growers. So it's not only endless summer, but they were one of those first. And what they also did is the breeders themselves took marketing on. And so it was one of the first plant marketing campaigns that actually went directly to the consumer. And you probably saw or you know, may have seen ads in Home and Gardens magazine and Fine Gardening and Sunset promoting the Endless Summer Hydrangea program, which drove customers to the garden centers and kind of created demand for that whole new generation of hydrangeas. So flash forward however many years since that original, and now Endless Summer is a series with a range of different hydrangeas within that series that all have this remontanence, so the reblooming ability to flower on old wood and new wood, more compact forms. In fact, they've gotten a very compact, almost dwarf hydrangea that we'll look at, called Summer Crush. And then flower forms, mop heads, and lace caps. And the really interesting tag that they use, which is partnered with always this blue pot. So you see the color of this blue pot, and then it's very clearly labeled Endless Summer Hydrangeas. And any hydrangea within that series is always going to be found in that marketed and kind of, you know, easy to recognize blue pot. Now it also has usually a very user-friendly tag to make reference to, and not only does it have, you know, some great gosh, you can text for care reminders. So gosh, you can text Endless Summer 73095 for timely care reminders. You can see some great planting instructions, for example. But then on the front of the tag, not only does it give a nice photo of the flower form, and it's showing us a color, but that color can be affected by the pH of the soil. And so again, it gives us this bar, and the bar represents the different colors that we can achieve. So if you see here acidic soil, you're in more of a Merlot type color, and in alkaline soil, it's going to be almost like a hot pink. So the range that we can pull kind of is represented in these wonderful little bars on these tags. And then it's also showing us -30 degrees for hardiness, so that's pretty darn tough. The size on Summer Crush, oops, going this way, is 18 inches to 36 inches. So we're talking about a compact plant that gets 1.5 feet tall to maybe 3 feet tall, full sun to partial sun or partial shade. So Summer Crush can take quite a bit of sun. It is short enough and compact enough to even be grown in a container, for example. So of course this one is in like a number 2 container. I would put it in a pot at least twice the diameter and depth of this to grow it happily through the summer. And we see that it is just beginning to load up with flower buds tucked into the plant, and it's going to be covered with flowers within the next week or two. The lace cap form that we have right now is called Twist and Shout. And again, you can recognize that it's from that Endless Summer series. And Twist and Shout not only is showing us that lace cap style, but again, negative 30 degrees, 3 to 5 feet tall and about 3 to 4 feet wide. And then the color bar here shows us a nice, almost cobalt when you get into the real deep acidic soil, and then really quite, let's see if I can not shade. So really quite a bubblegum pink, or just a nice bright pink when you add lime and create that alkaline soil condition. So the range and your ability to create change in the flower color can give you, gosh, you could have a different color kind of every season if you wanted. Now again, there's a white version of the Endless Summers. It's actually called Blushing Bride. So the flower bud comes out with a tiny tinge of pink, but by the time it blooms, it's a pure white, and that color tends to stay white. So no matter what we do to the soil, we keep that one white. The out of the Endless Summer series, but still, as I mentioned, lots of different plant breeders getting into the hydrangea game. Monrovia has come up with a really cool series that's called Seaside Serenade. And the Seaside Serenade series are also, they tend to be compact, so they're a little bit smaller growers. They are also of that next generation, so they bloom on old wood as well as new wood. No matter what on those rebloomers, the less you prune, the more flowers you're gonna get. So that's why a more compact plant is just a convenience of not having to prune as much in the first place. Seaside Serenade is another series. So this one is Hamptons. There's like, they're all seaside towns, right? So there's like Seaside, Cape Cod, and Hamptons, and there's a Newport. So they're fun names, and you could, pick your favorite city, I guess. But one of the cool things about the Seaside Serenade Hamptons, not only is it compact, so 3 to 4 feet tall, it's got a pretty flower cluster, almost kind of a ripple or a ruffle to the bloom. And then once it opens, just a nice classic large mop head flower style. But it has a little bit of a red tone to the leaves. And so the red tone to these leaves actually helps this plant withstand heat and sun. So the Hamptons version of the Seaside Serenade, this one's got a great red leaf that you can really see. So for most plants, red is like a form of natural sunscreen that a plant can produce to protect itself. So this particular variety or cultivar of the Seaside Serenade series has that red, which enables it to take more heat and more sun than a hydrangea that did not have that red on the leaf. So a little botany there. So that's kind of a fun representation of the macrophyllus or mop heads. And there's still 2 major groups of hydrangeas to cover. So we go into the panicle hydrangeas next. The panicle hydrangeas are becoming better known and are certainly edging towards being equally as popular as the macrophyllus or old-fashioned hydrangeas. Probably one of the original panicle hydrangea is just called Hydrangea paniculata, and an old form of that is PG. Think, like not rated R, but PG. So the PG hydrangea had large cone-shaped flowers that usually were white, although as we kind of are familiar with hydrangea flowers, they age and turn colors as they age. So they're not full of petals that just like get ugly and fall off like other flowers do. They get better with age in most cases, which again is something to celebrate for all of us that are also getting better with age. The additional cultivars that are coming out these days of the panicle hydrangea. I have something in my shirt. That was great on video, but bugs in my shirt. Yeah, there you go. The
Part of being a gardener.
Yes. Whew, the newer forms of panicle style hydrangeas are coming out and showing up in bridal bouquets, showing up on Pinterest boards, and probably one of the best known is called Limelight. Unfortunately, we're just a little early to really be able to appreciate the full bloomed look of a Limelight hydrangea, but again, make reference to the handout. Once it's posted, we'll have some pictures in the blog to see what they look like. But Limelight hydrangea, the original Limelight makes about an 18-inch flower cone that is white at the base and tapers to the top like a cone. It is, again, like if you bit into a Granny Smith apple, it's that like Granny Smith green. That's what the flower kind of starts as, and then it goes to an ivory, and then from the bottom of the flower to the top, it transitions to like a mauve pink, and sometimes even a little bit more of a darker pink or a dusky pink. It is a fairly large, Limelight is a big shrub, so we're looking at like a 6 to 8 foot tall and wide blooming plant. It can tolerate a little bit more sun, so the panicles can take some afternoon sun as long as you give them adequate water. The Limelight cultivar has also been bred with a counterpart that is smaller for those of us with smaller gardens, and that is a variety called Little Lime. And Little Lime, are you Little Lime? Yes. Little Lime here, I have a great big Little Lime, but Little Lime here grows 3 to 4 feet tall and wide. It has slightly smaller blooms than the original Limelight does. So they're maybe half the size, let's say 9-inch flowers. And as they age, you can see on this tag showing us a little bit of the pink colors of the Limelight as they age. So Little Lime and Limelight are kind of the tall and the small of that apple green colored hydrangea. And then also relatively new on the market in the panicles are a group of hydrangeas that turn pink faster. So they start white and then they turn to darker colors of pink or turn pink faster. And then this variety here, which is one of those, is Vanilla Strawberry. So Vanilla Strawberry hydrangea blooms about the size of the Limelight, so 12, 18-inch flowers. This original form gets again 6 to 7 feet tall and maybe about 5 to 6 feet wide. Vanilla Strawberry has also a shorty friend that could grow in smaller gardens, and that one's called Strawberry Sundae. Strawberry Sundae, 3 to 4 feet tall, 4 to 5 feet tall, 3 to 4 feet wide. So again, a smaller plant, slightly smaller blooms, but still the same effect that the vanilla strawberry has. And you can also kind of pick up, as I take this down and look, beautiful red stems on this plant too. So while we're waiting for it to bloom, or even in addition as it blooms, we have a little bit more, just something extra attractive to look at on the foliage. Another panicle here, Diamond Rouge. So starts out green, but then look at the color that we achieve on this one. So a really beautiful dusky rose. So panicles make great cut flowers as well, as I mentioned, as most of the hydrangeas do. They're long lasting in vases, and last week we did talk about cut flowers and flowers for bouquets, and while I'm talking here, I keep looking over at this vase of campanula that we cut from last week's class, and it's looking just as good a full week later, so kind of fun to take a look at class a week after. And a great cut flower is these beautiful Canterbury bells or campanula that we have in our perennials. The last one to talk about on the list are oak leaf hydrangeas. And oak leaves are pretty exciting for a lot of different reasons. Not only do they have a different foliage shape, as I showed in the beginning, so we've got these really wonderful textured, even kind of quilty or rough pattern on the leaf. Oak leaves can tolerate more sun than the macrophylla, so again, a little bit of filtered afternoon sun, even an angle of, late hour or two is going to be fine for them, and with a little bit more color. So the leaves turn colors ranging from yellows and oranges to purples and burgundies on the tips before the leaves drop in the fall, which gives us just a whole added, beauty or aspect of beauty to watch and wonder as the plant goes dormant for the season. Oak leaf hydrangeas also flower in a cone shape, so not a mop head, but that more elongated flower that we can start seeing develop here. They still look really green, but as these flowers develop, they're going to turn white, and then as the flowers age, that white fades to, again, like a dusky rose or sort of a mauve pink. You can see on this particular one the kind of orangey stems and just a little bit more interest to the foliage than one of these macrophyllus where we're just kind of usually waiting for flowers to come out. And this is a dwarf form of oak leaf. So oak leaf hydrangeas come just like a lot of these others in ranges of sizes. You can have a great big one, 6-8 feet tall. Those would be things like Snow Queen, Alice, and then all the way down to dwarf forms of oak leaf, which would be things like peewee or munchkin. And munchkin I have here. Munchkin gets about 3 feet tall and 3 to 4 feet wide. Peewee is a similar size as well, both with beautiful, same type of flowers. And a relatively new form of oak leaf hydrangea called ruby slippers, which, similar to the different panicle style hydrangeas, I don't know if you can see that in the foliage, is, I can't, how's that?
Good.
Shows the flowers turning pink more quickly and just kind of the effect of the pink blooms against the foliage of the plant. So ruby slippers here is a mid-size 4 to 5 feet tall. Again, a little bit more sun tolerant to boot. So once we have gone through all of those different species of hydrangeas, their different flower tendencies and shapes, our ability to affect flower color and even volume by watering or pruning, you will be able to make reference to the end of the handout where we talk about pruning. There's really method 1, method 2, method 3, and you'll see based off of the type of hydrangea and when it blooms, specifically how you would go ahead and prune on them. The other thing that we often talk about when we go through these types of specific plant types classes are fertilizer needs and pest or disease issues. Hydrangeas are very minimal pest issues, so that's fortunate for us. They are relatively deer resistant, although they can be sampled by deer. They are relatively pest resistant as well. The more sun a hydrangea is exposed to, a little bit more stress is put on the plant. We can sometimes see late summer spider mites be an issue for hydrangeas, and then sometimes caterpillars and a few just kind of random, generic bugs that kind of bother our garden can be found in the hydrangeas. And they, in areas of poor airflow or deep shade or a lot of plant congestion, sometimes we can see some fungal diseases such as a kind of a rust or a black spot that or powdery mildew. But again, that has usually more to do with cultural conditions, like I said, poor airflow or dense vegetation. They can be pruned to have a better condition to improve, to increase the odds that the plant be healthy. Other than that, they are not heavy feeders. Maybe once or even twice a season, all-purpose regular fertilizing of your hydrangeas, or if you like to keep them on the blue side, you could even feed them the same fertilizer you would give rhododendrons, azaleas, camellias, an acid-letting fertilizer. Otherwise, Portland Rose Society 15-10-10 or the organic form of Rose Society fertilizer is great. We also love the GMB all-purpose or Paradise blend that you could just throw and go. Really, that's another one of the things that we love about hydrangeas. Easy keepers with very few problems. And may that describe your life and your garden, and happy days to you. Thanks for watching.